Hello, everybody. Welcome to another EUDF LinkedIn live session. Today, with a very intriguing topic that I will get to in a second. Before that, I would just like to remind you that our next masterclass is starting on 16th of October, and it's going to be 7 Thursdays. And the Thursday of Thanksgiving, it's not going to take place. So don't worry about that. It's just going to be like skipping that one Thursday. And our conference is coming up next week in wonderful Budapest. And we will also have a pre-conference on the 18th of September. And on the topic of solution-focused org design. So make sure to sign up if you haven't yet. And the main conference is going to take place the 19th and 20th of September. And here, Milena put like the link in here so you can check it out. And now we're going to be getting into the topic of today, which is set people free, designing human-centric organizations in turbulent times. Big title, but an even more special guest today, lovely Luca Solari. I would like to welcome you on stage. And
Hello,
there you are.
thank you.
Buongiorno, Luca. How are you?
I'm good. Buongiorno to you as well. Everything sounds fine here in Lugano.
Oh, yeah, you are in Lugano. Usually you are in Milan, right?
Yeah, sure. I decided to come over here to find a decent scenery for the background, to compare it with your great background at your home, which is wow.
I appreciate that, Luca. I love your background too.
Thank you.
um, why don't we start the conversation having you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience, to the ones who don't know you yet? I do think a lot of people know you yet because you were also a speaker at last year's conference in Milan. But please, the stage is yours, Luca.
Oh yeah, thank you, Tina, for this invitation. I'm an academic practitioner. That's probably the 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 purest form of what I do. On one side, I've started doing research, but then I got increasingly involved in bringing research into action. So for the past 30 years, I've had different roles, both in universities here in Italy and abroad, and at the same time conducted collaborative management research projects with companies, focusing mostly on topics that we are discussing today. So on one side, innovation change at different levels, design, management, leadership, and HR. And on the other side, trying to break out of this dilemma, which is on one side, we increasingly want people to contribute, to be engaged, to innovate, to contribute with new ideas and so forth. But on the other side, we have to do this within constrained environment, which are typical organizational structure. So how can you get the both? I mean, how can you create settings that allow for the same sort of spontaneity of, individual level innovation and change, and at the same time do that in a coordinated way? So yeah, I think that's pretty much about this.
You say it almost so casually, right? It's a piece of cake, right?
I mean, could sometimes it's been bitter. It's not so easy, but okay, it's kind of uh, I've always dreamt about this. So
Mhm.
it's a life project is not a research or consulting project. It's an ambition to find a way to help people live a better setting for people who will be working together in the future. Maybe I will never be able to, but conversation like this one look promising, and I'm eager to learn from your experience as well.
It's so great to have you here, Luca. And I recall like the first conversation we had, or we were like sitting for this aperitivo in Milan, and I asked you, "What's the topic, like the most pressing topic on your mind?" And you said, "Well, that's easy. It's freedom." And I was like, easy. Freedom comes in so many forms, right? And I mean, that was also the topic we really connected on, because I think we both have been looking into it out of very different kind of perspectives. And so I would love to dive deeper into that with you today, and how freedom is also playing out in organizational context, how we can maybe use freedom as a design principle even, right? and what plays, like what does human connection and proximity play as a role in all that context. So maybe to start the conversation with, what does freedom mean to you, Luca?
Um, as you mentioned correctly, we can attribute to the concept of freedom many different meanings. So it's key when we think about design, which in its essence is a way to uh, constrain the degrees of freedom of the system, in a sense. It's vital to understand how we are, defining it. To me, freedom is you know the possibility for a person to consider and maybe enact many different courses of action within a context based on the ability by the same person to reach out to other actors and to find a course of action that can be coordinated. So it's not doing what you want. Doing what you want is not freedom, or being completely, alone. You are stranded on a island. There's no discussion over freedom. You can do whatever you want, but it's not that you're free. You are free within a context where there are other human beings. And to be free in that context, it means you need to have the possibility of considering different courses of action, discussing different courses of action with other people, and do that in a way that is, in its ultimate sense, coordinate. I don't know whether that's an operational definition of freedom that everybody would agree on, but that's mine.
What's interesting is, like, I mean, what I understand from you is that freedom comes, like, for example, in a structure, like structurally, but also emotionally, physically, like relationally, even, right? Like that there is not like one right answer to say that, but if we see it in organizational context, there is like there's different kind of embodiment of it, right? But it comes down how you experience maybe freedom. Can I say that like this?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, it's a dual concept. It's true. It can be different subjectively on the basis of where you stand, your experience, your history, your expectations. So, and that's a key point to be made, because sometimes my experience trying to promote freedom within organization has been quite controversial. Sometimes
Mhm.
people apparently react against freedom because they see that as an increase in the burden that they have to take on themselves. At the end of the day, if you go to work and there's a limited set of things that you're expected to be doing, and you're not necessarily required to choose among them, but somebody tells you what to do, that's not necessarily negative. You can experience your desires elsewhere, potential. So that's a key point to be taken. So we need to allow people to be free within organization, but we cannot, because then it wouldn't be freedom, impose freedom then. That's one of my controversial points against emerging new forms of organization. So I'm not so
Mhm.
sure that, these self-management organizations are necessarily, making people experience more freedom than command and control organizations sometimes, which is bizarre, isn't it?
Yes. And obviously I have some experience in that. I mean, like I've always felt like I want more freedom in my life. And that was in self-expression, in, like freedom of speech, and like in all kind of different things, starting as a child and then a teenager. And then finally getting to this organization who practices self-management and getting in there. And it was like you need quite a set of principles and rules to actually feel free. And I think a lot of people, when they are talking like, about self-management and are not really into the subject of organization design, they're like very easily like, using these words like, oh, we don't need anything. We don't need rules. We don't need that. It's just everybody's just going to be self-managed. It's like, no, that's not really how it works. And then you get like the big chaos because you get frustration because people don't know, what am I accountable for? What are you accountable for? To what kind of, what are the rules of the game that we are playing here, right? So at the end of the day, you feel like so much more restricted than you hoped for. But the principles of self-management, depending on what kind of framework or method or tools you're using, are very, very much in place to use structure to set you free. And that's why I think it depends what you use there. So I still see the positive in it, but it's definitely, but I also distinguish between self-management and self-organization, how Fanish Puranam would do, right? So self-organization is more, like this really living organism that is, you can compare it with nature. Let's take this from Sepp here. Hi, Sepp.
Yeah.
Great that you're here. Could an analogy be being free to drive any route to get to a destination, but we need a car or tools, and we have to obey traffic lights and rules?
Yeah, I was reading through this, and I really find that intriguing. It's exactly like that. I mean, the problem is not about being able to do whatever. We all live within a constrained world. So, I mean, our existence as a species is not limitless. So, the concept of creating organization based on freedom is exactly the concept where we are taking what is already happening spontaneously. Think about job crafting. There's tons of research on the fact that even in extremely command and control organizations, people are still carving out roles based on their characteristics, on their desires, expectations, emotions, and whatever. So this is happening, but it's one thing if it's happening against the tide of the organization. It's another if it's happening within the push of the organization. So, in a sense, the analogy that Seb is giving us, to me, sounds very much appropriate. And, the only thing I would add is that there are two kinds of rules. Some of these rules are akin to the traffic light. So it's something that any community needs to take for granted because else there's no way of communicating and creating any meaningful relation. Starting from language, that's the baseline. But then there are other rules that come out of spontaneous order. So as time goes by, the same way we invented at some point traffic lights to solve problems related to traffic, we might be finding new rules and other stuff that are not mandated from a top-down perspective, but are part of the spontaneous coordination of factors that reveals how some both tools and rules actually could be beneficial to the system working in a consistent way.
Hmm. What I love with this also is that what Sepp is bringing up here is that in holacracy you talk about like you're an individual Ferrari. You just go, very fast, and then you have like just a very limited number of domains and roles that are the hard red traffic light where you first need to check and you look practically to the left and right and you wait. But what it brought also is that sometimes you're just overruling other roles and accountabilities, and then it gets personal as well, right? Where there was not really space for that. And I would love to get into that topic with you too. Let's look at Alex. It's like rules in a game. They don't constrain you. They constrain the wilderness of choices, providing you possibility to freely frame your choices.
Yet, but also we want our community to create new games. So, uh,
Hmm.
true, going back to what I said before on SEB analogy, uh, the rules are the foundation for a community within an organization to establish a meaningful connection and relation, also towards some shared goals or more or less shared goals. But then what I like in the freedom part is also the ability by that same community to constantly reinforce the fact that games can change. So,
Hmm.
and they can change in many different ways. I'm very fond of evolutionary theory. Sometimes minor changes initially can bring to completely different games. So you can take, soccer or football here, compare that to rugby, and compare that to football in the US. So to some extent, they have the same root. Small changes initially that brought up to completely different rules for completely different games. So that's the intriguing part of. So it's not only being free to act within existing constraints, but also how can we individually and collectively, content the existing system and develop new rules and new ideas and new ways of doing it's both.
Hmm. So, what's the direct relationship between freedom and engagement?
Um, I don't see necessarily. So I mean,
Oh.
and I mean, what I'm saying needs to be taken cautiously. So I can be much engaged also in an activity where I'm not necessarily experiencing freedom. So it's not necessarily true that to be engaged, you need to perceive that you are free.
Mhm.
Um, People can be much engaged by discipline. If you think people training, they are much engaged in what they do and they are just repeating exercises. So they are not that much free to choose among them. They can athlete. That's what they do. And see, they are very engaged. Obviously, it's quite difficult uh, to feel free if you're not engaged. So what is true is the other way around. So in order to experience your freedom, you need to be engaged. You need to have the willingness to put an extra effort in doing things, in thinking differently. So yeah, that's my point on that. I can be controversial because there's this whole idea that if you're free, then you're engaged. Unfortunately, many experiences I've had in companies, as I mentioned before, is that this is a simplistic assumption. And just because uh, being really free is also a little bit of an effort individually.
Mhm.
So sometimes people might be, spontaneously not really willing to do more for any other reason.
Hmm. Can we just like stay, Priya? We will come back to your question. I would just like stay for a minute at that like, um, because when we talked before, we also talked about the importance of human connection and proximity, right? And I'm
Yeah.
wondering how that is playing into the topic of freedom, because it's like we have this individual which has aspirations, which has needs, right? Is part of a collective and we have a shared purpose. How is that playing together? And how are we creating then organizations that are, I mean, you talked about evolutionary theory, like how I see it is then also that makes an organization adaptive and resilient, and especially in current times where change became probably a very obvious constant. I mean, it has always been there, but now it feels like it's just in our face somehow. So, what role does human connection play in that, in
Um,
relationship to freedom?
I adhere to a traditional view of freedom, as I said before. So to me, freedom is freedom of action within the constraint of some kind of social order that I contribute to.
Mm,
uh, 2 billion. So the relation to other is the basis for the construction of the boundaries of freedom.
mm,
So if, as I mentioned before, if I'm alone, I am totally autonomous and I cannot decide whether I'm more or less free. I am, that's it, and I can do whatever. It's only when I interact with other people that the concept of freedom takes a different meaning because there are two spheres. There's my freedom and the other people's freedom. And these two are within a context, as you said, where we have a purpose, we want to do something together. And so it's necessarily an interaction. And the problem is whether this interaction needs to be ruled by rules or it can be ruled by a continuous conversation between these two actors, which boils down to the fact that to me, organizational design in a freedom perspective is about, allowing people to develop ideas, ways of doing things. So the job crafting component. The second component is reinforcing constantly the idea that there's a common purpose, because else we don't perceive the need to interact with others. And the third is creating suitable routines and habits in order to let the different views of the organization co-evolve between the different actors within. So these are the three components. And to some extent, if you take several of the emerging models of organizations, they tend to have answers for each of these. So how do you promote the individual freedom? How you promote the purpose and the sharing, or how you promote the coordination? So I'm more at the level of the typology behind this than at the level of saying, okay, that's the model to be used.
mm. So how would that look like in a very practical manner when we would use freedom as a design principle?
So the way I did it, it was basically first and foremost to make people aware of the degree of freedom that they already have. So
Mm,
I prefer to work with small teams within large organizations. So the typical approach is not to think of a massive program where you implement a model across everybody. I don't trust that kind of approach, particularly
mm,
if you're taking an organization that's been around for a while. Um, right or wrong, I mean, each of us has its own experience and its own take. I'm pretty much a bottom-up kind of person. So I think that even when you are promoting organizational innovation, even more so actually, you need to start from the roots of organization. So
mm,
typically, we choose a number of small teams, meaning maximum 20 people, and we work intensively with them, both individually and as a group. And the first stage is let's look at what happens today in your work and let's analyze using also in a shared way. So not from the outside, but together in a collaborative management view, organizational analysis. Let's see what are the constraints that you perceive today coming from your boss, from your colleagues, from yourself, from rules and other stuff. And then let's try to assume that we can contend that some of these rules and constraints are not correct. So let's try to think how we can reshape work. And we do that first individually and then in smaller teams and then at the larger level of the team. And we start identifying what are the barriers to an increasing freedom. And by doing this, obviously, as I said before, you encounter people and people will react very differently. That's why I told you before that I've experienced the fact that it's not enough to tell people, okay, you're free, do whatever. That's a very stupid
yes.
assumption. You need to consider that people come from different stories, from different backgrounds, from different um, desires and expectations. And sometimes they need to heal because if you're for 20 years, you're being told what to do, all of a sudden, having somebody that tells you do whatever you want, I mean, it's not whatever you want, but it's just for the sake of simplicity, it's not necessarily going to have an impact. And actually, it can be perceived the other way around. which is one of the interesting things also about suggestion systems sometimes, when people get to constantly try to find innovation and ideas, but then in the end, they really don't believe into that. It's not coming from inside, it's coming from the outside. So I call that the inside out model, actually. So you start from the inside of the person, of the team, of the staff, and then you move that to a collective level. And you do that in different teams, and then you try to see what is common across different teams within the organization. Then you can try to scale that up. But that's the way we
Mhm.
proceed usually, with many difficulties, obviously.
Yeah,
Uh,
I was
yeah.
thinking I would love to see that in practice. Priel, why do you think companies tend to over-constrain people, limiting freedom?
I have, I've asked myself many times. I have two kind of answer. One is, let's say, research based. It's starting from the 70s, when a researcher tried to understand how managers would react to the ideas of the mechanic and organic models by Burns and Stoker. They found out a quite you know uh, counterintuitive thing. So to make it very simple, all of you know about it, but the idea is that the more uncertain and volatile the environment, the more you need to have an organic structure. The more stable, the more you have to have a mechanic structure.
Mhm.
Contrary to this, most research revealed that when the environment ended up being too much volatile, managers were asking for a very mechanistic structure. So, the explanation that a part of literature gives to this is that since uncertainty is something that, as a species, so it's precognitive, we are trying to avoid to some extent. Uh, Actually, we have a part of our brain. I mean, it's not a part, but the prefrontal cortex that has this as its goal. So try to make things stable and certain. When we
Mm.
experience too much anxiety from the outside, we revert to very
Yeah.
controlled stuff. So I think that on one side, what we are seeing today is that the greater the uncertainty and the difficulty, the more managers feel the urge, and top manager first among all the others, to have control of things, even though it's not real control, it's completely clueless. But I think I have it, and it's typical. The CEO that asks people, "Have you done this? Yes, do this way, and so forth," and never knows whether this is true, correct, useful, and so forth. So that's one part of the explanation. The second part of the explanation is probably also related to what I said before. If you take a random set of people and you allow them to be more free in doing stuff, you can have very heterogeneous outputs. So, in a sense, in a system where releasing your control, you find some people who block themselves, other that do too much and so forth. Maybe it's not an optimal strategy, but it's a satisfying strategy to make sure that at least you have a baseline that you're controlling. So that's
Mm.
the more cognitive explanation. Why the first one is more psychological in a sense. But both, I think, are not necessarily connected to results. They are more connected to decision makers within the organization. And
Like in
sometimes, yeah, I have the feeling the same is true also for new organizational models, that we have not yet completely released the idea that power dynamics play a role.
mm. Yeah, I think like the illusion of safety is quite is quite at the forefront on individual as well as then brought to a collective level into rules, into regulations, into structure, which is like creating another rigid kind of system, which is like breaking or not being able to respond to the changes that we are exposed to, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, so what's the way we should go, Luca? what should we do? I mean, I feel like freedom is like such a center point in like probably a major part of like more evolutionary organizational designs or progressive work or new work, call it however you want. But I feel like it's almost like a guiding principle, right? Like, okay, we need to set people free, but it feels still like the relationship or how it's like the same with this kind of personal development bubble we are living in right now. You know, Gen Y,
Yeah.
Gen Z, we disconnect to reconnect. But the point is, healing doesn't actually take place in disconnection, right? Because then you go out, you are exposed to the triggers again, and then you just start over again. So yes, it's good to disconnect sometimes to, you know, calm your mind, you know, I don't know, block out the stimuli, exactly, do your
I do.
meditation, great. Me too.
Yeah.
Actually, me
Yeah.
too. But at the same time, it's like, I know I need to be out there and stay connected to that the healing process is happening. And I feel like the same is obviously happening on organizational level, that we somehow we're challenged to make this connection of having the individual feel safe in the collective, still feel free to act like an adult in this system, to make the decisions that need to be made and be like a sensor for the organization, right? And have the impact you want to have, and individual needs are met within the collective to a certain extent. So I'm not asking for like a magic formula, because I'm very aware every organization is a different social system, and I keep bringing it up because it's a reminder to myself as well. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, that's my sacred graal search in a sense.
Yes.
So if I were to find it, it would be quite a mess, because then I wouldn't know what to search for. So I think it's a moving target. But to me, what is crucial, really boiling it down to simple things. Before I shared the, the 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 approach that we have used so far, but if I'm to go down to the smaller ingredients, I mean,
Mm,
the first ingredient, as I mentioned before, is put an effort to first remove non necessary uh, the unnecessary constraints, and second, help people recognize that they can come out and do things. So that's one component. The second is responsibility. We didn't talk about that, but to me, there's no freedom without responsibility, as
mhm,
I said before. So
mhm,
freedom is a course of action that's not only individually driven, but it's conscious and aware of where you stand.
mm,
So you exercise your freedom within a social context, so with its constraints and other stuff, and with the respect to other people. So that's the second component. On one
mm,
side, then, as I said before, creating condition in the context where you remove unnecessary, both real and perceived constraints. Second, work on responsibility that allows people to see how this is part of their of their role. And the third is randomness. So and creating space for randomness. What I mean, it seems silly, but what I'm doing now with a very large organization, very complex one. They asked me a 4-year plan to promote innovation. It's highly siloed, BUs, highly technical, dispersed geographically, very complex industry. So, kind of a nightmare. Only
mhm,
that it's wonderful for me. So, one thing that I'm striving to make them accept is that uh, another way to promote freedom is actually allowing some randomness in things. To give you a very simple example, within established organizations, people join meetings.
mm,
And, many of these meetings, if you're familiar with the garbage can model of organization by Cohen Marche Olsen, might be useless. So there's a lot of time that is, that's thrown out of the dustbin. Uh, what if we started thinking that 10% of these meetings are completely randomly chosen? So, Tina, you are working in marketing, let's imagine, or in a a circle on Mars, whatever. And 10% of your team's meeting will be in a completely weird and different arena where you just show up and you listen and you see people and you get to meet people you have never seen.
Mm.
And, randomness in a sense is a very powerful force in
Mhm.
large organizations that we don't use. So these are the
Yeah.
three ingredients I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Good one. Context. Because if we don't have context, how are we making informed decisions, right? And sometimes it's really hard to get context. I mean, like there's different, also like the, some people just like capturing practically data and these kind of things, but also not being exposed to that randomness, as you say. And I think there's two more things I would like to address with you. One is language. And the other one is also the topic of alignment versus synergies. Because what I've experienced a lot is we need to align. We need to align, for example, values to the organization's values, personal purpose to the organization's purpose. That's like what I have experienced a lot, right? But in everything else, align into the direction we are going, align in this and align in that. And it feels like alignment to me is a triggering word by now
Yeah.
because it's so packed with emotions for me personally. But I would love to discuss that with you because I feel like if we talk individual and the collective, the individual and the organization, alignment is one of the words we keep falling back to, and it's like the secret ingredient, and that's how we are, creating whatever we want to create and having the impact. And I feel like, moi,
You touch a point because I'm always been a problem child from school on. So, I mean, kind of a weird one because I tend to align actually when I enter in a new setting
hmm,
because I genuinely want to reach out to people to understand what they think. But then somewhere uh, there's, kind of a hidden spirit that uh, m- makes me aware of all the inconsistencies behind alignment. And what happens most of the time is that I tend to become the perfect member of the society and then I explode. So I'm kind of a
mhm,
bomb. And that has been true at school with friends when I was doing my civil service and everywhere. So, in a sense, that's probably one of the reasons I'm studying freedom within organization, because on one side, I recognize the importance of being part of something, but on the other side, I tend to, to see things in a way that makes me become a little bit angry at the ambiguity that hidden
mhm,
behind the line. So, going back to your question, a few years ago, a company asked me to create a non-academic white paper on purpose, and that was a kind of an interesting exercise. And basically, what I found was that most purpose-driven consulting, I mean, back then, so it's a few years ago, would be the typical Bright House kind of thing from BCG.
right,
So you interview top manager, what are their values, and then you take their values, and then that's silly. And that, I mean, purpose is created in a connection across people. So it's built up from how you interact with other people. So alignment is somebody has the ideas and it forces them on the others. And that's totally, to me, contrary to freedom. That's not to say that everybody can have their own values and do whatever they want. But the problem is exactly there, you see. So uh, even, if you take a model like holacracy, okay, the principles by Robertson, you might agree on that. But why should I personally agree to that?
yeah,
So it's either you believe or you don't believe. That's not the way in which, in my perspective, you promote the ability of an organization to innovate. You really need to
mhm,
accept that there are gray zones and that you have to call things the way they are, even in teams. And again, there's a quite sparse literature that is very seldom known by people on silence in organizations. I don't know whether you came across that. Probably you, yes, because you have read so much things and done so many things that you probably are at the second life in this.
Are you
So
kidding,
yeah,
Luca? You know, I never read stuff. I just experience it.
yeah, but so well that it's much better than people that are writing and reading. But silence in organization is one of the worst enemy of the cohesion of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And command and control promotes silence.
Mm-hmm. Of
And
course.
top-down purpose and alignment promotes silence. So
Yeah.
the idea is you need to agree. I don't agree, and I think it's important. But then the problem is I don't agree doesn't mean okay, it's not the way I want. It's not the spoiled child. It is the adult that brings things to the table and says, okay, you told me we need to be ethical, but now you're promoting somebody who sold something not being ethical. So what's it? Can we challenge that? But then, there's a lot of, as I said, ambiguity and hypocrisy in top
Mm.
managers. That's a big problem.
I mean, like the danger is in that what you've been describing with like this, like level of alignment on, like purpose or whatever. We're getting into the identity of the individual, right? So with
Yeah.
this kind of alignment, you're getting rid of the individual identity at some point, and that has obviously like a major consequence in how we approach problem solving and how innovative we are, and how we are relating to each other as well. So all that is then crumbling, and yeah, that's and yeah, also the silence part is if you have reached this kind of part, then the organization is really in danger in terms of
Sure.
not very built for like a future proof kind of way, right? Um, and I think the same is true for language, right? Like because I find it like I had this conversation at some point with Fanish Puranam about like
Yeah.
language, and we that's when we talked about self-management, self-organization, different kind of expressions and such. And at the end of the day, he said, well, we should try not to try to find this one language, right? Because it's actually like it's create like it's taking so much out. It's like the same, we're trying to find one framework or one blueprint for organizations to put on, and that then it's kind of like acting like a cookie cutter. And the same is true, I guess, for language. And if it leaves like this space for interpretation, but also this acceptance and individuality, you have also a different kind of freedom that you are creating in expression, and with that in behavior and how you're contributing an impact, I would say, right?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, you are making me think on many things. I have two very separate things on the issue of language. One is a movie from the 80s in Italy called Ratataplan that I sometimes use in class. There's basically this hiring session, and there's a group of candidates, and they are asked to draw a tree. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so most of them draw the typical tree, which sounds like Picasso, but it's actually I cannot draw.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them has all the colors, and he draws this wonderful tree, which is amazing with fruits. And obviously, all the others get hired, and he is not hired. So uh, that example is the one thing that I'm using when I'm telling people that when we talk about concept, even in organizations, the problem with concept and language is that ideas that we form can be, communicated to others through concepts. I mean, through constructs, which are words, but that's never going to be able to really completely bring to the other mind the idea we had. So it's, language is a way of making interaction simpler, but comprehension requires a lot of effort to the point
Mm-hmm.
that, one of the basic principles of linguistics is the principle of cooperation by Grice that states that unless we are willing to understand the other one, we cannot understand what people tell us. So we need to constantly put a perspective on what the other person is telling us. So that's one side. And the other one is clearly when you talk about language, Wittgenstein. So the fact that language is, as I said just before, is inherently a moving target. So language is not fixed; it's changing, and sometimes I find it
Mhm.
quite depressing that people end up having long conversation on whether self-management and self-organization and whatever else is the same. It's as if we are discussing whether something is red, purple, and then in the end we are just doing that without acting on it in a different way.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that's my perspective. So I understand that it's very difficult when you talk organizational design and theory to make sure that what you think can be communicated. And first, myself, if I think about what we have shared, I'm sure there are many things that if you hear them from outside, you say, okay, that's not complete. That's not,
Yes.
I mean, that's a problem. And within organization, we should recognize that because too many
Yeah.
times we have a simplistic view. Okay, I sent you the email. You should have understood. I've
Hmm.
communicated. It's over. That's not the way it works in true reality.
Yeah, but again, the illusion of safety, right? Which is like, where are we holding on to that we're not gonna, and that's
Yeah,
like rooting in ourselves, and we're
yeah.
not always there, right? So, yeah. Let's go into some questions. Mile, if you could, I think I saw a question coming by
I
Alex.
mean, there's plenty of questions and a lot of much brighter people than me. So I'm, oops, worried.
Uh, you're worried?
Yeah, I mean, too many interesting things.
Okay, so Alex, I think okay, Alex was commenting on something Ipek said. So handoff criteria should originated and inherited from business purposes. Strategy itself, from my perspective. Freedom might lay into the field of interaction and achievement of those parts of what's, which will be hand off to other colleagues within the value stream towards strategy.
Okay, let me
Yeah,
check the whole conversation because,
and that's an entire conversation. Okay.
yeah. Those are not the same. Well, I'm going to my lane to the field of fashion, those country lots between the end of the life and the value center. I'm again. I think there's much more than what I'm answering now. I mean, not answering because it's not an answer. I'm just
Commenting.
participating into a shared
Mm.
conversation. Um, yeah, I think that the concept of hands off uh, is uh, part of what I was saying before. So removing the constraints and also identifying areas where, as an organization, we are willingly avoiding any definition of what to be done. I mean, this we have seen it this in some part of the literature on innovation in the past. So the idea that innovation is risk, that innovation is brings along a lot of possibilities of failure. The fact that there are random walks and there are things that we do not know. So uh, I bring it down to what I said before. We need to accept that there are part of how we design organization that should be, a kind of a blue ocean where nothing is already said, where nothing is already decided, and where people are allowed to experience. And again, in some models, this is present. If you think of the lean startup model, what it is about, it's this, and the idea that you allow people to do things wherever they want. So yeah, that could be an idea as part of the constraints that I would add. If I did understand it well, because again, uh, I'm not a native, so maybe the language is a barrier to me.
Well,
as
I
an
mean,
employee.
everybody should just come to Budapest next week and hang out with us, right, for a
Yeah,
drink, and then we can discuss deeper everything. Let's
not
take.
too many drinks though, because that's gonna be too creative.
I'll watch out for you, Luca.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Okay. Thank you. You
Um,
are the wise person.
well,
Yeah,
let's
you are.
take one more question from Seb. As an
Yeah.
employer, where do you see the value of giving freedom as an employer? Innovation, engagement, personal fulfillment. So I do think
I.
we
Yeah.
touched a little bit of
Sorry.
them, but no, I think we
Um,
touched some of them, but would be nice if you
I think
take over.
that it's mostly, novelty. So at the end of the day, there's nothing as a stable organizational design. I think we can agree. I mean, there are many things we can disagree, but
Mhm.
one thing I bet everybody, whatever angle of design we are coming from, agrees that we cannot think of any organization design that can be the same for any. Okay, so given this, I think that freedom can be a very, from the employer perspective, a very powerful way of exploring the horizon of organizational innovation and innovation in general per se. Obviously, provided that you don't only release the constraints, but you also constantly check what's going on.
Mm.
Because another mistake that many companies do, maybe they launch this great program to make people free, but then they just let it go. Well, the problem is you need to learn from this. So you need to establish practices to make sure that what is invented, created, discovered is shared. And that part is lacking. So to me, if and I do that in my consulting, uh, as an employee, that's the reason. Uh,
Mhm.
because collectives and individuals randomly can come up with ideas that no structured organization is able to design.
Okay, last question. What does your research and experience reveal about the role played by ethics and consistent ethical behavior in freedom-based um, organizational journeys in clear skies as in turbulent temps?
And that's a key point. And I really thank so dearly this anonymous LinkedIn user, um, because that's the cornerstone. As I said, freedom is set in a social context, and within a social context, uh, the the fact that the rules for freedom and the opportunities for freedom that you receive are going to be not a moving target according to the needs and the urges of the organization, but a constituent factor of the community is key. And again, too many times we see, I had a conversation online, a very heated debate on startup and change and blah, blah, blah in
Mm.
Italy, actually, as of recent in the past 2 or 3 days, where the point was exactly this. So, what's the point of organization that grow by asserting that everybody's free and whatever, and then when it comes to selling or when it comes to hard times, somebody takes the helms and says, "Screw you, I take the decisions."
Yeah.
To me, that's one of the poorest ways of being a human in connection to others. So, using others by telling them, "Feel free, we are all the same," and then when it's useful to you, revert completely. I despise people like that. Even though sometimes it's not necessarily something that they do willingly.
No.
Because one strange thing I happen to see is that there's plenty of people that are so filled up by their own personality that they want to make the other free, uh, apparently genuinely. But then it's free under the condition that you do what I personally think is the most appropriate way of doing things. So yeah. So very, very, very deep and important question. Thank you.
Mm. there's many facets to this answer too. But yeah, Luca, it's
Yeah.
been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your input, presence, and your wisdom. And I can't wait to see you next week in person in Budapest. And I hope many of our audience are gonna actually like join us there. And until then, I wish you a wonderful day. And thank you to our audience for the great questions. And yeah,
Thank you so much, Tina, for having me here, for your incredible wit in conducting all of this. Uh, as I said before, whenever we have a conversation, I reach ideas that I didn't think before, which I think it's good. And that's something that pushes me to go further. So I'm looking forward to meeting you and all the friends at EODF and hopefully new friends at EODF next week. And for now, enjoy your week. And
yes.
yeah, and be free
And be
if you can.
free. Yes. Wild and free.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye.